The transformation from South Melbourne to the Sydney Swans had been set in motion, but it would take some time to fully take effect. The team that ran onto the SCG for our first home game in 1982 was under captain Barry Round and new coach Ricky Quaid. Both had credentials. Round was reigning Brownlow medalist, and Quaid would provide some 35 years of service to the club as player, captain, coach and director. But the Swans still had a foot in two cities. Some Southerners had flatly refused to relocate. Indeed, the bitter division was such that it was feared the club would simply disintegrate. But other key players were prepared to commit and form the nucleus of a new team. Among the most notable were Tony Morwood, one of the finest half-forwards in the game, and Steve Wright, whose skills and toughness were admired by both our supporters and opposition teams alike. Both later named in the Swans Team of the Century.
I just had a theory that I wanted to make my teammates the best player on the ground, and I wanted to be a player that my teammates wanted to play with, but the opposition didn't want to play against. So, you know, sometimes you've got to take that different line, and maybe they might call it white line flair a little bit, but yeah, so be it.
And there was always the ever-threatening presence of fullback Rod Carter, whose miserly attitude to opposition forwards was already famous. Also willing to throw their hats into the ring were two of the club's most respected stalwarts, Mark Browning and Dennis Carroll, top quality players who would both go on in time to skipper the team. It quickly became apparent that the idea of training down in Melbourne and then flying up to Sydney for home games couldn't really be justified. In 1983, the club had to take the next step and formally locate all officials and players and their respective families to Sydney. And so began another unsteady period when ownership of the club would alternate between the league and various groups of private investors. Once relocated up north, the Swans had to overcome either hostility or indifference in the rugby-mad state. What we desperately needed was a marquee player, a public face that could promote the Swans to a new audience. And we found just the right man. Warwick Capper was a high-flying full forward from the reserves, noted for his mullet haircut, spray-on shorts and cheeky larrikin air. He was a marketing dream who quickly became the Swans' pin-up boy. But he could also play. He would become only the second player in our history, after the great Bob Pratt, to kick more than 100 goals in a season. Between 1982 and 85, the club was owned by the AFL. Between 86 and 92, there were seemingly endless forms of ownership, alternating between private investors and the AFL. To many outsiders, it seemed that private ownership had been more about raising revenue for the AFL to distribute among its cash-starved Victorian clubs than with assisting the Swans towards financial stability. But the precarious financial situation off-field didn't stop the recruiting drive. Future Team of the Century members David Murphy and Mark Bayes.
In my era, there was Ruse Jones, there's Barry Round, Stevie Wright, those sorts of players, Mark Browning, Dennis Carroll, and you know, I felt like I didn't really belong, but it was a heck of an experience right from the start, and everything happened in 86 and 87, and all the superstars turned up, and you know, we had the Greg Williams, Bernatui, Bolton, Nagel, went on. We had Morris Rioli here for a while as well.
As the 80s began to pass, there were two significant developments. The team ran out for the first time in the Guernsey that would forever identify us with our home city.
And there was one period there where we were kicking 30 goals 3 weeks in a row, so we're playing good football.
And we all believed, the guys from that era, that if we had had one of those finals up here, we probably would have gone on and played in perhaps one or two grand finals in that sort of era. I thought we were the better team in 86 and 87. It just wasn't to be, and it just shows how hard it is to win a grand final.
And the 2 years of being a top contender started to fade away. The same could be said for the situation off the field. Facilities were third world, and membership dropped to below 3,000. In fact, we appeared little better off than the bankrupt South Melbourne had been. It looked increasingly likely that the great interstate plan was going to end in disaster. Fortunately, we did manage to attract one critical supporter, insurance company QBE, who stepped up to pledge their support in the club's hour of need. All these years later, they still remain our major sponsor. Another bright spot in the general gloom was the debut of a skinny kid from Wagga named Paul Kelly. He would go on to be an inspirational captain and a Brownlow medalist, joining Skilton and Pratt as genuine Swan legends. But our backs were against the wall, and poachers from other clubs were circling. While the league publicly supported our survival and brought back the licence, everybody knew it was the last throw of the dice. The Swans responded with one of the most daring appointments possible. The biggest name in the game, Ron Barassi, was formally announced as coach halfway through the '93 season. It didn't pay immediate dividends, but there were signs of improvement in the playing list. Among them was the emergence of Andrew Dunkley. Recruited in the 1991 national draft, he joined Paul Kelly, Darren Cresswell and Mark Bayes in becoming the backbone from which the club would be rebuilt. By the mid-90s, things seemed to be turning around. Although Barassi left, saying that it was time a younger man took on the role, he had lent his persona and credibility to the club for 3 years. And there were some key new signings who would play a large role in the coming events. One was Leo Barry, an athletic left-footer from Dunkley. Leaping Leo was also capable of taking a big mark under pressure, and it was that ability which was going to one day write him into Swans folklore. Another was Michael Magic O'Loughlin, a Rising Star nominee in 1995 and later honoured with selection in the Indigenous Team of the Century.
And I remember Craig Holden taking me out to the SCG, and it was the first time I'd seen it live, and I just thought, how good is this? Such a special place historically, but obviously being able to apply my trade there for the next 16 years was something that I never dreamt about.
Paul Ruse was already an established star when he was recruited from the Ailing Fitzroy, but it was in another role that he would write his name into Swans history. But the signing which would overshadow all others was that of Tony Lockett. When the word got out that the giant St Kilda full forward was on the market, virtually every club in the competition went after him. It was only with a great deal of persuasion that he decided his future lay with the Swans. It was considered the recruiting coup of the decade. In 1995, only a 5-point loss to Brisbane kept us from what would have been an unbelievable appearance in the finals. Lockett won the goal kicking. And to cap everything off, Paul Kelly, who had been handed the captaincy after only 50 games, took out the '95 Brownlow medal. With this influx of talent, in 1996 we made the grand final, finishing runners-up, but it gave the team a taste of the prize that had eluded us since 1933. And given our long absence from the grand final stage, the loss was more one of disappointment than outright devastation. Partly due to injuries, a few relatively ordinary seasons followed, but individual players continued to improve. Stuart Maxfield, recruited in '96, went on to captain the side on the retirement of Paul Kelly. Under coach Rodney Eade, we continued to have some good seasons, but were inconsistent. We bolstered our playing stocks with the recruitment of Barry Hall from St Kilda. In 2002, Paul Ruse replaced Eade, and we managed to pick up and develop new talent.
To get the job at the end of 2002, I had to present to the board, and I said in the thing, quote unquote, I will deliver a premiership in 3 years. So I think that was more hope than anything else.
Leadership by new captain Stu Maxfield saw the Bloods culture begin to develop and take root amongst our players.
His emergence of the culture jointly with Paul Ruse and the empowerment of the players was a critical factor in the club reaching the levels it did through the 2000s.
And likewise at the board level, there was a growing commitment to building an elite football organisation. Then 2005, a year for true believers. Against all the odds, we played in 4 finals, including the miraculous win against Geelong. That final Saturday in September would prove to be a landmark game for the Swans. The last 2 teams left standing were Sydney and the West Coast Eagles.
I just remember running onto the ground, and as we ran out, you just hear this roar, and it just sort of took up the side of your face, and you just feel all those emotions bubbling up inside of you, all your hairs on your arms tingle, and all I could see is just red and white. It was really bizarre. It was like the whole crowd was just red and white.
It promised to be a hard and tough-fought battle of attrition, and so it turned out. In the last minute, there were only 4 points separating the sides as the Eagles made a last, desperate drive towards their goals.
One last roll of the dice for
I felt, and Stevie felt, Mark Browning felt, Barry Round felt, that was a combination of all the hard work from the early days.
To see them do that, you know, I was raptured and a little bit jealous that, you know, I wasn't a part of it, but, you know, certainly that.
You know, it took, you know, a week or so to really sink in that we'd finally won a premiership, like after 72 years.
The 2005 grand final was just the culmination of a wonderful period for our footy club.
You know, all the heartaches they had, all forgotten. It was a great moment.
This is for the Bloods!
The Bloods culture has probably existed in varying forms over a long period of time, but I think it was almost unveiled when Brett Kirk grabbed the microphone, and it lives on today, and I think it's fundamental to where we want to take this club.
We became identified in the minds of the football public as having a special brand that led the way in determination and hardness at the ball, an undying self-belief and a will to win. We had 12 finals appearances in 15 seasons, plus a rare double Brownlow winner along the way. In 2010, Paul Ruse advised he would not coach beyond the current season, and John Longmire was unanimously appointed senior coach for 2011.
I think John has all the attributes that are needed to be a long-term successful coach. He's been in this system for 10 years, which means a big part of the system is actually as a consequence of John's philosophies and policies, and so it was one of the easiest decisions I think we've all, you know, had to make.
It is a different role, no doubt, than being an assistant coach. I mean, you know, whilst I've been an assistant coach for 10 years and worked really closely with Ruse, you understand it is a different set of responsibilities, and I'm really enjoying it. It's you know, it's hard work, but I think what I really learned from Ruse is that you've got to have really good staff around you, and I think that I'm lucky enough to have really good staff, which helps enormously.
Off the field, we continue to strengthen with major support from partners such as QBE, City, and more recently, Volkswagen. But perhaps one of our most innovative moves has been the establishment of the Sydney Australian Football Foundation, which became a major backer of the Swans' aspirations to maintain an elite football department supported by coterie groups such as Centre Circle, Blood Brothers and the Red and Whites, and the QBE Sydney Swans Academy, a groundbreaking initiative in the history of the AFL. In 2011, Paul Ruse accepted the role of the Academy's head coach.
What we say to the kids is we're providing the framework, we're providing the coaches, the facilities, and then really it's up to the kids to get the best out of it. But I think it's one of the biggest legacies this club will leave in terms of development of the code in Sydney is having an academy.
The growth of the academy in 6 months has just been spectacular. In the time I've been here, there's not too many things that have excited me more than seeing the academy get off the ground and grow.
I think it's really exciting for the footy club going forward that we've got so many players of different ages coming through our footy club and some really exciting young kids coming through at the same time that can really help drive the footy club forward. The club knows where it needs to go. It's got a clear focus and a pathway, and are sticking to it. So I think from that point of view it means that there's a few ups and downs along that road, but in general you need to know where you're going and maintain that focus.